The cameras captured her glow, but never her silence. To the world, she was light incarnate, the golden girl who seemed carved from some impossible dream of beauty. But beauty is never weightless. It carries its own gravity. And Claudia Schiffer would learn, almost too quickly, that perfection comes with its own cage. She was born in Rheinberg, a small town in West Germany, far from the lacquered runways of Paris and Milan. Her father was a lawyer. Her mother, a homemaker. The Schiffer family lived simply, with no thought of glossy magazines or flashing bulbs. Claudia grew up quiet, reserved, painfully shy. In photographs from those years, her expression is often soft, almost hesitant, as if she could not quite step into the frame. She dreamed of following her father's path, of working with books and laws, not mirrors and lights. But small towns have a way of shaping girls into myths the world is eager to consume. Her height, her hair, her startling resemblance to Brigitte Bardot, even before she turned 17, whispers followed her through the streets. She did not see herself the way others saw her. Beauty had not yet become a weapon. It was simply a shadow she carried, one that drew attention she never asked for. Then came the night that rewrote everything. Düsseldorf, 1987. A nightclub dim with smoke, humming with bass. Claudia stood near the back, unsure, when a scout approached. He belonged to Metropolitan Models, a man searching for faces that could sell dreams. And there she was, pale, blonde, delicate as porcelain, but with something ineffable, a fragility that could be mistaken for mystery. 17 years old. Still half-child. Suddenly given an invitation to Paris. The fairy tale story of being discovered. But fairy tales often conceal their thorns. Paris was not tender. It was a crucible. Claudia arrived with almost no French, no friends, no map of what awaited her. The city was dazzling but cold, its boulevards built on centuries of art, romance, and hunger. She was a provincial girl dropped into a machine that consumed beauty like bread. Models came and went, their faces pinned on boards like butterflies, their futures decided in the briefest glance of a casting agent's eyes. For Claudia, it was a baptism by fire. The industry demanded presence, confidence, seduction, all things she did not yet possess. She had been a shy girl in Rheinberg. Now she was asked to be a woman for the world. Behind the gloss of test shoots and fittings, she endured rejection, loneliness, and nights where the silence of her Paris apartment seemed louder than applause could ever be. And yet, something about her remained undeniable. The camera adored her. Photographers spoke of the way her features held light, as if her face were a canvas designed for obsession. There was a paradox in her beauty, angelic yet distant, soft yet untouchable. She was not a firework, she was a statue suddenly made flesh. The world was ready. The 1980s were closing with a hunger for spectacle. The supermodel era was forming, and fashion was about to elevate models from nameless mannequins to gods of consumer desire. But it would not be a gentle ascent. Those who rose too quickly often discovered how thin the air was at the top. Claudia Schiffer, the shy girl from Rheinberg, was no longer allowed to simply exist. She was now a commodity, a brand, a screen upon which fantasies could be projected. She had been given a passport into a new world, but one that required leaving her old self behind. The cameras captured her glow, but they never caught the tremor in her hands. The cameras captured her glow, but never her silence. They caught the curve of her lips, the golden fall of her hair, the way her eyes seemed to hold a secret they never truly revealed. She was radiant, almost too radiant, as though beauty itself had stepped into human form. To the world, she was a flawless symbol, the blonde ideal, the dream sculpted in flesh. But what the flashbulbs could never trap was the quiet beneath her smile. The tremor beneath the stillness. The cost behind the perfection. In the late 1980s and early 1990s, fashion was not just about clothes. It was about mythology. It was a theater of desire where women were made into icons, untouchable figures who seemed to rise above ordinary life. Claudia Schiffer arrived at the exact moment the world was searching for such a figure, a woman who could embody fantasy and still remain just out of reach. She was not the firebrand like Naomi, not the athletic American goddess like Cindy, not the enigmatic artist's muse like Christy. Claudia was something else. She was purity cast in marble, the unreachable blonde who seemed as if she had always existed in memory, even before she appeared on the page. Magazines called her the perfect face. Advertisers described her as the modern Bardot. Designers treated her like a mirror, a vessel into which they could pour their vision. To audiences across continents, she looked like the answer to a question they had been asking without words. What does beauty look like if beauty could be made absolute? And yet absolutes are dangerous things. They demand sacrifice. They strip away the human to preserve the symbol. For Claudia, being placed on that pedestal meant learning to balance between her true self and the self the world expected to see. The world wanted the goddess. The girl, shy, hesitant, uncertain, was quietly erased. The irony was brutal. She was called the Ice Queen, yet she was not cold at all. She was branded untouchable, yet she longed for touch, for something real beyond the fevered dream of lights and contracts. She was seen as confident, commanding, the woman who could hold a runway in silence, yet backstage, the nerves clawed at her, stage fright tightening its grip before every walk. Still, the machine of fashion was relentless. Perfection sells, and Claudia was perfect in the eyes of those who paid to define it. She was everywhere, 1,000 covers, 1,000,000 billboards, her image pressed against the consciousness of a generation. She became more familiar than strangers, more present in people's daily lives than some family members. She was the face in the magazine rack at the airport, the body on the billboard towering over city streets, the silent gaze in a commercial whispering luxury into living rooms. But with that omnipresence came erasure. The more the world saw her, the less they knew her. The more they adored her, the less they heard her voice. She became a surface, a reflection, an object onto which culture projected fantasies of purity, desire, and impossible perfection. And in that reflection, her humanity blurred. The cameras loved her. The public worshipped her. But Claudia herself, the young woman from a quiet German town, the girl who once dreamed of being a lawyer, the child who blushed when spoken to, disappeared into the light. The cameras captured her glow. They never captured her silence. And in that silence, an entire story waited, a story about what beauty demands, what it extracts, and what it leaves behind. Before the marble goddess, before the 1,000 magazine covers, before the whispers of perfection, there was a little girl in a quiet town. Rheinberg, West Germany. A place of modest houses and still streets, where lives unfolded with the rhythm of school bells, church hours, and the dependable tick of the seasons. It was not a place that bred fashion legends. It was a place where children played in gardens, where families lived measured, ordinary lives. In this small world, Claudia Schiffer arrived on August 25, 1970. Her father, Heinz, was a lawyer. Stern, disciplined, a man who believed in rules and order. Her mother, Gudrun, tended to the home, raising 4 children with a firm but gentle hand. In photographs from that time, Claudia's blonde hair falls simply across her face. There is no makeup, no glamour, only the wide, uncertain gaze of a girl who does not yet know she will one day be called the most beautiful woman in the world. She was painfully shy. Teachers remember the silence, the hesitance, the way she seemed to shrink when eyes landed on her. Unlike the girls who demanded attention, Claudia seemed to move with the hope of slipping unnoticed into the background. Words were not her gift. She kept them close, private. Instead, she learned to observe the world, her siblings, the steady routines of her parents. And yet, even in Rheinberg, whispers followed her. She was tall, slender, blonde, a combination that, in a town of ordinary faces, marked her as something apart. The comparisons began early, like Brigitte Bardot, some said, marveling at the symmetry of her features, the effortless beauty that required no adornment. But Claudia did not see what they saw. In mirrors, she saw awkwardness, shyness, the face of a girl who wanted to be invisible. Beauty was not yet a gift. It was an uncomfortable spotlight she could not escape. Her dream in those days was not fashion. It was law. To follow her father's footsteps. To work with logic and books, not runways and cameras. She imagined a quiet future in offices lined with files, where her value would come from her mind, not her face. For a girl so shy, it was the safer dream, to work behind the desk, not in front of the lens. And yet destiny is often written in irony. The very thing she wished to escape, her beauty, her difference, her luminous presence, would become the thing the world demanded most of her. There is a certain cruelty in how small towns prepare their daughters. They raise them in quiet, in order, in rules. And then, one day, the world arrives, greedy and insistent, demanding that same daughter abandon her quietness and become a spectacle. Claudia would become that daughter. She just did not know it yet. In Reinberg, her life was still simple. School, family dinners, holidays. She helped her mother, she studied, she lingered at the edges of parties instead of dancing in the center. Her siblings teased her, loved her, protected her. There was no hint, in those soft years, of the storm that was coming, the storm of flashbulbs, contracts, and global fame. If you look at the old photographs, the irony is almost unbearable. You see a girl with hair falling into her eyes, shoulders drawn inward, posture folding in on itself as though she is protecting something fragile. And yet, that same girl would soon be displayed to the world as the embodiment of confidence, glamour, and icy allure. The divide between the child she was and the woman the world would demand is the heart of Claudia's story. A shy girl, raised in the smallness of Reinberg, was about to be pulled into an empire of spectacle, where silence would not save her, where shyness would be mistaken for mystery, and where beauty would speak louder than any words she could have said. The story begins not in Paris, not in Milan, not under the bright lights of fashion. It begins in Reinberg, in a town too quiet to imagine what it was giving up. Fairy tales often begin with a girl who does not know she is beautiful. This one began in Düsseldorf, 1987, on a night she almost didn't want to leave home. 17 years old. Still half-child, still carrying the hesitance of Reinberg in her posture, Claudia followed her friends into the dim glow of a nightclub. Music throbbed through the air, smoke coiled toward the ceiling, shadows shifted beneath neon light. She stood near the back, tall, awkward in her own eyes, her beauty still something she wore like an oversized coat she hadn't grown into. And then came the gaze. The one that would alter everything. Michael Levatin, a scout for metropolitan models, was moving through the crowd with a practiced eye. His business was faces, faces that could ignite desire, faces that could be sold like silk or perfume. And then he saw her. Blonde hair falling like pale fire. A face both fragile and arresting. She did not smile. She did not need to. Her stillness was enough. The approach was simple, almost casual. Would you like to be a model? But behind the question was an entire future, one she could not yet fathom. Contracts, cities, runways, fame. And also scrutiny, exhaustion, loneliness. The question was a key, and once she accepted, the lock would turn forever. Claudia hesitated. She thought of her father's law office, the life she had imagined for herself. She thought of her shyness, the silence that always wrapped itself around her like a cloak. How could a girl who struggled to speak in class stand in front of cameras and command them? But the man's conviction was unshakable. He told her she had a face that could not be ignored. A beauty that did not belong to Reinberg alone. And beneath her reluctance, something stirred, curiosity, perhaps, or the fragile thrill of possibility. So she said yes. The story would later be told like a dream, discovered in a nightclub, whisked to Paris, transformed into a global icon. But the truth was sharper, more complicated. That night was not the start of a dream. It was the end of her anonymity. In the weeks that followed, Claudia's life shifted. She traveled to Paris, a city she had only seen in films, its boulevards vast and intimidating. She walked into agency offices where her face was assessed like fabric, her body measured like architecture. Every detail noted, catalogued, commodified. At first, the rejections cut deep. Her shyness read as indifference, her hesitation as lack of presence. Agencies wanted girls who commanded attention, who bent the room around their aura. Claudia seemed to fold inward, protecting her fragility. But then, in front of a camera, something unexpected happened. The stillness that made her awkward in life became magnetic in photographs. Her silence transformed into mystery. What she could not say aloud, her eyes whispered on film. Photographers leaned closer. They spoke of the light on her skin, the way her face seemed to contain echoes of another era. Bardot. Hitchcock's icy blondes. Women who were both desire and danger, softness and enigma. Claudia carried that same contradiction, a purity that could also seduce, an innocence that could also wound. The fashion world, always hungry for archetypes, recognized her immediately. She was the modern blonde ideal, a vision to project onto billboards and magazine covers. But for Claudia herself, it was overwhelming. Paris was a crucible, dazzling but merciless. The city of love, yes, but also the city of consumption, where girls were chosen and discarded with frightening speed. 17. Alone. Lost in translation, surrounded by voices she could not understand, expectations she could not meet. Nights were long, the silence in her small apartment pressing down on her like a weight. But every morning, she rose, dressed, and went again. Something in her, perhaps discipline inherited from her father, perhaps a stubborn ember of curiosity, refused to give up. And then, one photograph changed everything. A campaign that would catapult her from anonymity to fame. But that is the next chapter. For now, we linger in Düsseldorf, in that moment when a shy girl was seen, chosen, and marked. The world called it a discovery. Claudia would learn, in time, that it was also a sentence. Paris was supposed to be the city of dreams. But for a 17-year-old girl from Rheinberg, it felt like exile. The train pulled into the station, the city looming in all its grandeur, wide boulevards, stone facades, centuries of history stacked upon each other like theater backdrops. Claudia stepped into it quietly, suitcase in hand, her German tongue useless against the river of French voices around her. This was not Rheinberg. This was a metropolis that consumed people, that chewed them up in pursuit of art, beauty, and profit. Her agency handed her a small apartment, bare walls and echoes. At night the silence pressed down like a second skin. The city outside buzzed with life, laughter, music, but inside, she felt swallowed by loneliness. Her days belonged to the industry. She was shuttled from casting to casting, standing in lines of girls just as tall, just as blonde, just as hungry. She was measured, photographed, dismissed, measured again. Every rejection stung like glass against skin. Too shy, too reserved. Not enough presence. She was told to smile more, to stand straighter, to command the room. But how could she? The girl from Rheinberg who had once dreamed of law books was suddenly expected to transform into a goddess before strangers who barely looked her in the eyes. Paris is merciless to innocence. Claudia's hesitation read not as vulnerability, but as weakness. The industry did not want the girl, it wanted the icon. And so she learned to stand still, to let silence turn into mystery, to allow her reticence to be mistaken for allure. In photographs, what felt like shyness became something else, an untouchable cool, a frozen glamour that the camera adored. The very stillness that doomed her in castings became her greatest weapon in print. But behind the lens, the struggle remained. Claudia wrestled with language she could not speak, streets she could not navigate, a culture that felt distant, indifferent. She cried often, quietly, with no one to hear. She had family back in Germany, but here she had no hand to hold. The city demanded she grow up quickly or be swallowed whole. And yet, something in her endured. The discipline instilled by her father, the stubborn pride of her small-town roots, the awareness that she had already been chosen, all of it propelled her forward. She did not collapse. She stood. Even when she trembled inside, she stood. Paris in the late 1980s was a crucible of fashion. The supermodel era was forming, designers preparing their runways as global stages. Powerhouses like Chanel, Dior, Yves Saint Laurent were casting not just models, but symbols. Women who could embody their fantasies, women who could turn cloth into myth. Claudia was one of countless faces, yet the lens seemed to linger on her longer. Photographers whispered that she carried the ghost of Bardot, the glamour of an older France reborn in German flesh. Still, glamour had its price. The city that lit her image also dimmed her spirit. Every success felt fragile, conditional, as if it could vanish the moment she faltered. Every rejection cut deeper because it was never about talent, but about her body, her face, the shape of her nose, the tilt of her jaw. She learned to live with constant scrutiny, to accept that she was no longer entirely herself. She was a commodity being carved by other people's hands. This was the baptism of fire. A teenager cast into an adult world where innocence was currency, and the cost of keeping it was impossibly high. In the years to come, Paris would make her. It would turn her from the shy girl of Reinberg into the icon of a decade. But in those first nights, alone in her apartment, her hands trembling in the quiet, it felt less like transformation and more like surrender. The city did not care about her silence. The camera did not care about her fear. It only cared about the image. And Claudia, whether she wanted to or not, was becoming that image.